we can speak to Thomas Andrews, UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Could I just start by asking you, what do you make of those charges against Aung San Suu Kyi?
Well, obviously, they're absurd, but so are the charges of 8.6 million voting irregularities that the military launched when it originally came up with its rationale for the coup d'etat. They couldn't find evidence for those voting irregularities, so apparently they've been able to find evidence of walkie-talkies. So it's obviously absurd. This is a complete outrage. And the people of Myanmar obviously are under, there's tremendous fear in the streets of Myanmar. These protests, civil disobedience is, of course, what they're able to do in the short run. But what I'm hearing from people on the ground in Myanmar is that they need our voices of the international community and international action to address this outrage and to make it clear to them that they are not alone.
Yeah, we've heard just a short while ago in the last couple of minutes from the US State Department saying they're disturbed by what happened in Myanmar. But, you know, apart from condemnation, which we've heard quite a lot of, what else can the international community realistically do?
Well, number one, that's a very important first step, condemnation. It's been all over the world. But sanctions, I believe, and an arms embargo, an international arms embargo and targeted sanctions that hit the generals where they hurt the most, their wallets, will be very, very important. The EU had a series of sanctions in place before they lifted them in 2012 as democracy began to take root. Those are there. They existed. They were effective. And I think that the European Union, the United States, the UK, Canada, and others need to seriously look at sanctions as an immediate step that can be taken to respond to what's happening there in Myanmar.
We haven't mentioned China. China clearly an important player in the region and one that I think it's fair to say has considerable leverage over Myanmar's military. I mean, were China to be brought on side, would that change something? Would that change the situation on the ground dramatically, do you think?
Well, it certainly would make a very positive difference. The fact that the Security Council had a meeting at all is because China didn't object to it. So that was a very positive step. But of course, the generals in China have always been close. They've always looked to China to protect them in the Security Council. They've always looked to China to provide them with weapons, with trade. And so I'm sure that's going to continue. There's limitations, however, to how much support China can provide for them. The economic support is not very popular in Myanmar. The Belt and Road initiatives have not meant jobs for the Myanmar people, have shuttered aside communities. The environment has suffered. So it's not popular. The strong economic influence of China and the international community in terms of trade and investment and opportunities, of course, are overwhelming. And if they're cut off from those trade opportunities, it could make a significant difference for these generals.
And just tell us a bit more. I mean, you touched on it in your first answer, but I mean, tell us a bit more about the sort of pressure we could see from within Myanmar itself. I mean, obviously people banging pots and pans outside their windows isn't going to change a huge amount, but there have been these reports of industrial action being taken by doctors and nurses in some parts of the country. I mean, were that sort of thing to gather momentum, do you think we could see the change come once and for all from the people of Myanmar themselves?
I think it's going to take a combination, people working inside and generating support from outside of Myanmar. I think it's not an either-or situation. But yes, there's lots of discussions going on right now. As you mentioned, the healthcare workers in over 70 healthcare facilities are participating in this action. I understand that there are communication workers that are now actively engaged in discussions. Some of the trade unions are actively involved in discussions. Networks of attorneys are actively involved in discussions. So there's lots of discussions going on about various civil disobedient options. But there's lots of fear on the ground there. You know, this is a brutal military regime. This country lived underneath their rule for many, many years. So they understand just how brutal they can be. So there's fear, and there's a need for the international community to join with those inside fighting for their democracy and freedom. And it's a 1-2, I think, collaboration that's going to be necessary to get this job done.
So just looking ahead, lastly, I mean, where do you see things heading? I mean, do you think there's a chance that this could all come to an end within the next year, or would you be less optimistic than that?
Well, it's really, really hard to say. It's a good question, but it's really hard to say. I think that the action needs to come immediately. I think that the international community needs to act with sanctions. There needs to be governments throughout the world getting those discussions underway. The sanction regimes exist in the European Union. They are in place. We just have to reactivate them. So it's a fairly straightforward, I think, from the point of view of mechanics of getting these sanctions engaged. The question now is, will the political will exist in areas like the European Union, the UK, and the United States?
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us, though. Thomas Andrews, UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar. Thank you for speaking to France 24.